गुड इवनिंग एंड वेलकम टू गनर शॉट। गनर शॉट में आप सबका स्वागत है। जय हिंद, वणक्कम और प्रणाम। आज हम बात करेंगे सोमालियन पायरेसी, मैरिटाइम सिक्योरिटी, खास करके अरेबियन सी और रेड सी के इलाके में, और वहां हमारा इंडियन नेवी क्या कर रहा है। और इसके बारे में बात करने के लिए हमारे साथ हैं एम्बेसडर गुरजीत सिंह साहब। सर, गुड इवनिंग एंड वेलकम।
जय हिंद, गुड इवनिंग।
जय हिंद सर। तो मैं सबसे पहले सबको बताना चाहता हूँ, इससे पहले कि मैं शुरू करूं, ये आइडिया मेरे को कहाँ से आया। ये एम्बेसडर साहब ने एक आर्टिकल लिखा ट्रिब्यून के अंदर 4-5 दिन पहले, दैट सोमालियन पायरेसी इम्पेरिल्स मैरीटाइम सिक्योरिटी। आप भी पढ़िए इस आर्टिकल को। जब आप इस आर्टिकल को पढ़ेंगे तो आपको पता चलेगा कि इसका क्या फाइनल डिटेल्स हैं। अगर हम ये नहीं समझेंगे तो इस इलाके में जो हो रहा है, हम सिर्फ गाजा और इजराइल और रेड सी और हूतीस के बारे में सोचेंगे, क्योंकि ये एक नया बीमारी शुरू हो गया है इस इलाके में। और मैं ज्यादा बात नहीं करूंगा, इतना ही बता दिया इस बीमारी क्या है, कैसे यहाँ शुरू हुआ है, इसका जड़ जो है 10-15 साल पहले चलता है। ये सब के बारे में हमारा एम्बेसडर साहब बोलेंगे। सर, ऑल योर्स, आप बात कीजिए। किस भाषा में बात करना चाहते हो आप बात कर सकते हो।
Thank you, General Shankar. Always a pleasure to be on Gunner Shot. And thank you for inviting me to speak on a fairly esoteric topic, which is
थैंक यू
Somali.
सर।
So, first, I think we need to pay kudos to the Indian Navy. They have performed admirably in the last few months in dealing with piracy in the Gulf of Aden. Now, this is different from the attacks on civilian shipping in the Red Sea, which is coming from the Houthi rebels of Yemen. Now, I want to draw this distinction. There is the Suez Canal, from where ships come into the Red Sea, where Houthi Yemeni rebels are attacking shipping with the main purpose of attacking Israeli and Western interests. In this, you see the Red Sea next to Saudi Arabia
Yes,
and Yemen, next to Eritrea. The Red Sea actually leads to the Suez Canal. So they are attacking shipping there and making it difficult for ships to go to the Suez Canal. Now, if you come south, you see Djibouti. And then after Djibouti, you come into the Gulf of Aden. And you see that big horn of Africa jutting out. That is Somalia. So the Gulf of Aden is where Somali-based piracy was rampant earlier, was then controlled, and is re-emerging now. And this is where Indian Navy has taken action. Now, the importance of the Gulf of Aden is, if you see, it goes into the Arabian Sea, which is the neighboring sea to India. And then it also comes into the Indian Ocean. Now, when you threaten the shipping in the Red Sea and make it difficult to use the Suez Canal, ships coming from the east and from India avoid that area and start going south to the Indian Ocean to go around the Cape of Good Hope. But here is where Somalia is there. If you see where you have got this anti-piracy action sign, that is where Somalia is. It is on Gulf of Aden on one side and the Indian Ocean on the other, and they can disrupt the alternate shipping route as well. Now, the pirates of Somalia do not have a geostrategic or geopolitical objective. They are simply looters, sea looters, piracy. They are looking at attacking ships and collecting ransom. At this moment, there have been about 25 attacks since in January on mainly small fishing trawlers and dhows, because the Somali pirates have got small dinghies and skiffs, what are called skiffs, outboard motor, small boat, by which they can move fast and board these small boats, but you don't get big ransom out of them because these are small traders. The big ransom comes from threatening big ships. So the biggest attack was on the MV Abdullah, 25 seafarers, all Bangladeshis, Bangladesh flagged vessel carrying coal, that was boarded by several Somali ships in the Indian Ocean side. And that is the one that Indian Navy freed. And then the second one was on the MV Ruin, a Bulgarian
Yeah.
flag. And that again the Indian Navy freed. But while freeing the Ruin, RUEN, the MV Ruin, there was an altercation between the Indian Navy and these pirates. The pirates like to take on a big ship and take it to deeper waters and use it as a mothership. So then their dinghies are offloaded from the mothership, and then they go and attack other big ships in the deep sea, not on the coast. So attacking a big ship has two objectives. One, use it as a mothership. Second, get a bigger ransom. Now, when the MV Ruin was being freed, an Indian Navy drone was shot at by the pirates, and they also shot at the Indian ship. So finally, I think a contingent of Marcos commandos was airdropped to a C-17 Galaxy. I think this was a very good exercise. And they managed to take over recover the ship, overawed the pirates, and I think arrested 35 and are bringing them to India. Now, this is a significant departure from the past. Between 2007 and about 2012 was the peak of piracy in this region. And there were about 20 different navies operating in tandem, trying to control this piracy, in which India also participated in a very big way. The Chinese Navy also came to participate in these anti-piracy operations. And they used this occasion to test their supply lines. And after this operation, they decided to stay in the region and hence opened a naval base in Djibouti, which already had a French base, an American base, and a Japanese surveillance base. So Djibouti has rented out its territory to 4 powers, not all on the same page. But in that period, when navies caught pirates, they did not know what to do with them, because domestically you could not do anything, and what they would do was basically puncture their dinghy and then let it go, let them be on their own after disarming them. But the EU paid Kenya and Seychelles to set up trial courts against piracy under international law. But most countries were reluctant to host this because Somali terrorists could mount attacks on you to free these people. Now, India is bringing 35 pirates back. Now, this is interesting. That now our approach is different. Earlier, we only sent them to the Seychelles. This time, we are bringing them back because of 2 things. First, since 2022, India has a maritime security law which allows you to domestically proceed against acts of piracy against Indian interests. So these pirates which are be brought back will be handed over to Indian police. A case will be registered. Secondly, these pirates had fired at an Indian naval ship. So this is an attack on an Indian asset. So this gives you more reason to try them in Indian courts. I think India is showing not only bravery and courage in dealing with them in the high seas, but also willing to take logical legal action against them.
So one
Now,
question I have here, if I is there any other country in this vicinity who's enacted such a maritime law by which these pirates can be, prosecuted in their lands?
you see, there is a thing called the Djibouti Code of Conduct, which I think around 2014 or so was amended, called the Jeddah Amendment. Now, following the Jeddah Amendment, I think there are about 16 countries who are members. India as an observer, has joined as an observer. All these countries are theoretically supposed to proceed against piracy. But each one has to have their own domestic legislation. Now, I'm not aware how many have done it.
Yeah, okay.
That is one. Now, why is Indian Navy in the forefront? You see, since 2018, there were no known acts of piracy around Somalia. So there was a UN Security Council resolution empowering foreign navies to act in Somali waters, to act against piracy. So because since 2018 there were no acts of piracy, in December 2022, that authorization lapsed and was not renewed. So currently, there is no authorization for foreign navies to enter Somali waters and act against pirates, except with Somali approval. Now, the Somali government, which is trying to establish authority, actually prefers that its coast guard be strengthened. Now, the Somali coast guard has 750 people who are trained by EU and others, but has only 4 boats, out of which I believe only one is functional. So that coast guard is not really functional for the purposes of dealing with piracy. Now, I think here I would like to mention 2 points why piracy has rekindled in this region. The first one is that since the Houthi action in the Red Sea, many ships which used to patrol around Somalia have actually shifted, particularly American and EU ships, to protect shipping in the Red Sea. They have left the patrolling areas of the Gulf of Aden vacant, which allows the pirates to come back because there's no policing. The second part, this is interesting and I'll explain it in detail later. Somalia was essentially supported by AMISOM, the African Union mission in Somalia, backed by the UN, which helped Somali government fight against first the Islamic courts and then their splinter group, Al-Shabaab. Now, Al-Shabaab is on the run, but it has elements which are armed. So they are like, the movie 47 Ronin. I mean, headless samurai, armed but no leadership. So I don't think that they are friendly to the Houthis, but they see the Houthis as inspiration and therefore are undertaking acts of piracy because they have the weapons and they can acquire the boats and move to the sea and start looting people or asking for ransom. Now, though the United Nations mission in Somalia is now in transition and it's called, I think, ATMIS, African Union Transition Mission in Somalia, they are helping to build the capacity of the Somali government, but not undertaking military operations, due to which there is more political activity in Mogadishu. Now, here I need to explain that, let me go back. In 1960, Somalia became independent. Now, when it became independent, it was actually the Italian trust territory. It was the trusteeship territory given to Italy by the United Nations to run, because Somalia had been an Italian colony. Now, in 1925, Italian Somaliland had acquired Jubaland, which is near Kenya. Jubaland was part of the British East African Protectorate. But due to clan affinities, Jubaland was handed over to Italian Somaliland. So, if you go real south near Kenya, that is where Jubaland is. You can't see, it's not marked on the map, but it is there. So, that was handed over to Somalia and became part of the, here you can see Jubaland right in the south. So that became joined up with Italian Somaliland 1925. So when Somalia becomes independent in 1960, Italian Somaliland plus Jubaland become a new country. Now, if you look up north, next to Djibouti is Somaliland. Somaliland was a British protectorate. They took their own decision and said, we will also join the new Somalia. So within a few days of independence, and I think Somaliland had 5 days of independence from Britain, then they joined Somalia. And then you see Puntland. Puntland was not independent. It was a part of Italian Somaliland. But due to clan holdings, they always had a certain amount of autonomy. And what you see as SSC is again clan-based autonomy. But Jubaland, SSC, Puntland, beyond autonomy, they never sought independence from Somalia. Whereas Somaliland does, I'll come back to this. Now, each of these, let's call them regions that I am discussing, have got their own elected governments, different from Mogadishu, owing loose allegiance to Mogadishu. All of them are pumped with capacity building money by the European Union and other Western partners to build governance. One of the governance structures which was built was their Coast Guard. In the case of Puntland, it was called the PMPF, the Puntland Marine Police Force. I can tell you that all these marine police or coast guards in all these regions actually are very efficient. And they were strengthened when piracy was being controlled, so they became the ultimate arbiters of controlling piracy in the later stages of piracy, anti-piracy operations. Now there is no piracy since 2018. But what you have are very efficient Coast Guard or police forces who have started becoming players in the domestic politics of these regions because they are armed and efficient. Typical developing country syndrome. In Pakistan, we understand it. The army plays the role because it is armed and an efficient institution. So these forces which were trained to guard the coast have now become players, particularly in Puntland, and spend most of their time meddling in politics and not looking out to the sea where nothing is happening. Now, if you look at Puntland, it is actually the tip of the horn of Africa. And that is where much of the piracy trouble is coming earlier and now. Because the ships have gone, other navies have gone, Puntland's Marine Police Force too involved in domestic issues, and piracy raises its head. Why Puntland? Let me give you some figures. You know, in the case of, if you look at the populations, Somalia as a whole has 25 million people. Somaliland has about 5.7 million, Puntland 4.3 million, Jubaland 1.3 million. But while Somali GDP PPP per capita was 2000 and Somaliland 852, Puntland's GDP per capita is only 372. It is among the poorest parts of Somalia. It has the problem of poverty, instability, and the vexed problem of unemployment. As I told you, Puntland has 4.3 million people. It's almost 20% of Somalia's population, but very high unemployment because it is very bad terrain. So the people were trained in doing fishing. So this is what you call the blue economy. So Somalia in general, Puntland in particular, can thrive on a blue economy. Now what happens is that there's an immense amount of foreign trawlers, mainly Chinese, which come to that region and put the local fishermen out of business. As a result, you have fishermen who have boats. Now they have weapons. Now they have no navies there. And they have these trawlers who are denying them rights to fish in their own waters. Now what do? They return to piracy to attack those same trawlers and capture them. This is the nexus which is happening. Now, once they get that trawler, then they try and use it to go for a bigger ship. Because these trawlers are small, they can only loot them, not much ransom comes. But you must understand that piracy is a business. Already due to piracy, the number of armed guards on civilian shipping in the Gulf of Aden has massively gone up. Now, armed guards are useless in the Red Sea when the Houthis are attacking you with drones and missiles. But they are effective against pirates. So, armed guards are back in fashion, raising the cost of shipping. Insurance costs have gone up. So insurance companies which provide armed guards are all making good business. They did big business in the 2007 to 12 period and they're making big business again now. What is worse is that they are actual money lenders or piracy financiers. Some of them are on record in news reports. They are funding these people. Go and capture that trawler. Let us take away their fishing catch. We will sell the fish and make money. Now, this is small time piracy. And then they pay off these pirates. Here, take some money. I'm selling this fish. Next, they will capture the coal on a ship. Next, they'll capture gas on a ship. So, these pirates are being financed to go out and capture ships and run a parallel economy of Somalia. The International Maritime Bureau says that in the heyday of piracy, in those 5 years, $7 to $8 billion was the cost to the global economy per annum. $7 to $8 billion per annum, which included ransom payments. Now, nobody wants to say I paid a ransom. But if you, in those days, saw how many new banks came up in Djibouti and how they were flourishing, the only answer was that this was perhaps ransom money being parked there. You see the amount of property ownership in Kenya by Somalis. When I was in Kenya 10 days ago, they say all these areas taken over by Somalis. Where did they get the money from? And these are not Kenyan Somalis. These are Somali Somalis. So the recycling of ransom money, money laundering it into the economy has made Somali's life better. Now, on one hand, you have instability in Somalia. On the other hand, there are grandiose dreams of Somalia. You know, the Somali flag is a light blue and it has a five-pronged star. This is not the Star of David. It is the star of the full Somalia. Each star, each corner of the star represents one area where Somali people live, which Somalia wants to reunite. One star, one segment represents Italian Somaliland, another represents British Somaliland. They are theoretically one. Then there's Djibouti as another prong. There is the Somali region of Kenya. It's called the Northeast Province, I think. And then there's the Somali region of Ethiopia. Now, Djibouti was the French Somaliland, where the British Somaliland, Italian Somaliland, Djibouti was French Somaliland. The main clans there were slightly different, the Afars and the Isas. Here, Djibouti. And Djibouti borders Eritrea and Ethiopia, where the Afars also live in Ethiopia. Afar, there is the Afar province in Ethiopia. But Ethiopia has the Somali province, which is here, called Ogaden, which juts out here in this, into the Horn. So in 1977, I think, when Djibouti became independent under the name Djibouti, Syed Barre, who was the military ruler for 30 years in Somalia, actually tried to take over Ogaden in Ethiopia because there was a weakening military government run by the Derg of Mengistu in Ethiopia. The Somalia was backed by the western powers. The Derg was backed by Russia. It was a massive battle for several years, but they could not take over Ogaden. And tensions with Kenya over the northeastern province remain. So from that time, when Somalia thought they'll unite all the five prongs, today they are hard pressed to retain what they have. And this contributes to instability and consequently piracy. Now, Jubaland is right next to Kenya. And I told you that till 25, it was part of the East African Protectorate, which included Kenya. So Kenya has a lot of links with Jubaland. Jubaland also has an important port. I think it's called Kismayo, which also was a hotbed of piracy in 2005 onwards. But when the Islamic courts took over Somalia, Ethiopia intervened. And then the Ethiopian intervention led to the establishment of a transitional federal government of Somalia, which was then backed by the UN and African Union under AMISOM. And this AMISOM mainly had Ethiopian and Kenyan troops, some from Uganda and Burundi, but mainly Kenyan and Ethiopian troops. The Kenyans cleaned up the entire Somaliland, Puntland, up to Mogadishu. The Kenyans cleaned up Jubaland and they took over Kismayu, shutting down piracy from Kismayu. Kismayu now a flourishing port. So now let's come to Somaliland. Somaliland believes, unlike Jubaland or Puntland, that it should be independent. They actually seek independence. They maintain relations with foreign countries. They have an independent relationship with Ethiopia and Taiwan. Taiwan, not China.
Yeah, understood, sir. Very interesting.
That is where Somaliland comes in. The British have been backing Somaliland ever since I was in Ethiopia, trying to get it recognition. Now, the latest is that Ethiopia, whose 95% dependence on a port is Djibouti, today thinks it should have its own port. Therefore, they have signed an agreement with Somaliland that the port of, I think, Bosaso, is it? Somewhere in Somaliland port, Ethiopia will invest in. And in return, Somaliland will give Ethiopia a naval base. Ethiopia has no navy right now, landlocked country. Will give them a naval base, land for naval base. Like Djibouti has given land to other countries, Somaliland tells Ethiopia, I will give you land. And in return, Ethiopia promises recognition, diplomatic recognition to Somaliland as an independent country. Now, this has really ruined the relationship between Mogadishu and Addis Ababa. Now, here I must tell you of the new dynamics in the Horn of Africa. They have a regional community called Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD, which is in Djibouti, which brings all these countries together. Somalia, Kenya, Ethiopia, Djibouti, Eritrea, South Sudan, everybody is in it, Uganda. Traditionally, the Kenyans and Ethiopians were aligned with Djibouti and they ran this organization and the politics of the region. But now, Ethiopia has broken with Kenya, linked up with Sudan, trying to dump Djibouti, linked up with Somaliland, and trying to set up a new coalition. This has annoyed Somalia and Djibouti. Somalia, its territory is affected. Djibouti, because its lifeline, the port will be impacted if Ethiopia stops using it or curtails the use. So already the UAE, Qatar and Saudi Arabia are very active in this region as a fallout of the Yemen crisis. They are quarreling with each other and finding allies. Now, what has happened is that Turkey has stepped in. And once Ethiopia signed up with Somalia, annoying Djibouti and Somaliland and annoying Djibouti and Somalia, Turkey has signed defense agreement with Djibouti and Somalia saying, I will fix the Ethiopians. So this area is very messy. So though there is a lot of feeling that, stability is returning, AMISOM can go out, the geopolitics is very messy. Ethiopia is part of the problem rather than the solution now. And with the problems in the Red Sea, the lack of international policing around the Gulf of Aden, all this is contributing to instability, lack of governance, and consequent rise in piracy. Now, I think there are one or two related things which I could try to explain. The current wave of piracy is once again seemingly brewing from Puntland. Unlike Somaliland, Puntland is less economically endowed and organized, and therefore its youth feel threatened in terms of economic opportunities. The lack of proper fishing fleets and intrusion by many countries' fishing trawlers, including Chinese, deplete fishing stock from traditional fishing grounds. This unregulated and illegal fishing prevents local employment efforts in the blue economy. The piracy legacy with arms coming in from the now subdued Al-Shabaab perhaps means the remnants are acting on their own. A word about the Djibouti Code of Conduct and its Jeddah Amendment, to which India is an adherent. This provides regional navies the locus for action against piracy. It has been instrumental in repressing piracy and armed robbery against ships in the Western Indian Ocean and the Gulf of Aden, and its scope significantly broadened to cover other illicit maritime activities, including human trafficking and illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. So I think these are very important points. But the IMF and the World Bank have recently approved the completion point for Somalia under the heavily indebted poor countries initiative. This provides total debt relief to Somalia of $4.5 billion. Now, it's Somalia's external debt decreased by 64% of GDP in 2018 to less than 6% of GDP by December 2023. Sir, this is a huge decrease. This debt relief will facilitate access to critical additional financial resources that will help Somalia strengthen its economy, reduce poverty, and promote job creation. Now, the problem is that while the world is taking such positive action, piracy is coming up, which is totally contrary to all these efforts. The post AMISOM governance, the post HIPC financial relief coming their way, all this will be derailed if piracy is not controlled. Because piracy means that the ransom that they gather, they then use to bribe officials, buy out parliamentarians, control administration, and use the proceeds of crime to get administration under their control. Now, if this happens again, all these positive economic things will stop happening. This is what troubles me. There are efforts to include Somalia in the economic processes of Africa. So besides IGAD, which is essentially a geopolitical organization, they are a part of COMESA, which is the Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa. They are a part now as the 8th country admitted 2 months ago into the East African community, which will give them trade access. And under the Africa Continental FTA, they can actually start trading with other countries. But to do this, you must have your own production, your own manufacturing, your own services. Now, if you divert yourself into lucrative piracy rather than build economic institutions, then you'll again become a rogue state. So it is very important to have Somali authority from Mogadishu asserted over Puntland and Jubaland with a gentle touch, not with a hammer. Because all the clans people of Somalia are very autonomous in their thinking. They don't mind working together with you for economic benefit, but they don't want to concede authority so easily. So I think what Somaliland has done, basically improve its economy and consequently its governance, is what the rest of Somalia needs to do. And if piracy is not curtailed, we are going to have serious problems. But the problem with India's friends in the region is that they are working in silos. They are at the moment handling the Houthis because it is the geostrategic requirement. But they are not looking at the path. That is why you see everywhere Indian Navy in the forefront. An analyst based in Nairobi who deals with Somalia told me that we are so impressed with India that they are the only country taking resolute action and trying to curb piracy. Today, the pirates are scared of the Indian Navy. So on that, I once again praise the Indian Navy for its wonderful action, and the fact that they were always in the region is now visible because they are acting against people who are not only against India, but against the global economic situation, which Africa, India, and the globe cannot afford a further disruption. I'm going to stop there and take questions if they are ready. Thank you.
So, yeah, before we take questions from others, मेरा एक सवाल है सर, आपने जो बोला है, ये जितना भी पैरासी हो रहा है, it has roots in their socio-economic structure, socio-politico-economic structure of Somalia with Somaliland, Puntland, Somalia main and Juba. वो तो है. And because वहां बिगड़ रहा है, piracy is the easy option. So it's a actually ये क्या है कि एक सेल्फ फीडिंग सिस्टम हो गया, और मेरे हिसाब से ये सेल्फ फीडिंग सिस्टम बिगड़ता जाएगा, क्योंकि सबका नजर जो है वो इसराइल और गाजा के ऊपर है और हुतीस के ऊपर है। किसी को फिक्र नहीं है कि इसके बारे में करना क्या है। और ये मेरे ख्याल में ये इसमें ये जब तक हम पायरेसी के ऊपर काबू नहीं करेंगे, बिल्कुल वहां कुछ होगा नहीं। ये बात तो आपका सही है कि इंडिया का रोल और इंडियन नेवी का रोल इन कर्बिंग पायरेसी इज वेरी हाई, इसमें दो राय नहीं है। पर मेरा सवाल ये है कि आप देखिए, आपने ये भी बोला और ये बात सही है कि चाइना का ट्रॉलर्स आके इस इलाके में मच्छी पकड़ते हैं, और कुछ हद तक ये पायरेट्स उन ट्रॉलर्स के ऊपर भी शिकार करते हैं, उनको भी पकड़ लेते हैं, राइट। और उसके लेके फिर वो मदरशिप को पकड़ते हैं, फिर उस मदरशिप से ऑपरेट करके बाकी काम करते हैं ये। तो इस हालत में पीएलए जो वहां डिप्लॉय हुआ है और जो वहां इसीलिए तैनात है जिबूती में एक बेस बना के, ताकि एंटी पायरेसी ऑपरेशन करे, वो क्यों नहीं कर रहा है ये काम?
Okay, so at the moment the pirates are a small industry. So they know that the Chinese trawlers are taking their fish, but all reported attacks are on independent trawlers, not on Chinese fishes.
Okay.
And the two big ships that they targeted, one was Bangladeshi, one was Bulgarian, unlikely to attack, obtain retaliation unless the Indians stepped in. So I think whoever is guiding the pirates is studying this system. Now, if they were to attack Chinese trawlers, then the Chinese Coast Guard or the Chinese ships out of Djibouti would have to take action. That provocation has not happened yet, but the Chinese don't appear to be playing the benign role that India is playing to protect shipping in that area. It is not as if Chinese ships don't pass that area. So why they are not playing? Is there a lack of deployment, lack of will? I don't have clear answers to that question. We have to follow that. But please remember, even last time around, the Chinese were among the last to come. But they mainly came to test their resilience and their supply lines and to establish a presence. That was the result.
No, I agree with you completely, sir. The fact is that ये भी रिपोर्ट आ रहे हैं कि the Houthis are not going to, target Russian and Chinese ships. ये तो न्यूज़ रिपोर्ट्स हैं. Is there a case where China has probably bought off these Houthis and probably even bought off these pirates कि भाई आप हमें छोड़ ये कर लो? This is completely up China's allies.
So
and they might have.
The Houthis are backed by Iran. So if the Chinese tell Iran, the Houthis will not target China.
Will not do.
Yeah, but yes, the Chinese back channel to prevent attack on its trawlers through a carrot and stick policy, even by advance payments, cannot be ruled out. Cannot be ruled out.
Okay, so the way you're putting all this across, ये तो लगता है कि इंडियन नेवी का डिप्लॉयमेंट वहां काफी देर तक चलता रहेगा. And there's no other navy which is going to come and help Indian Navy out or be in tandem with Indian Navy कि वहां जाके इन एंटी पायरेसी ऑपरेशंस करें. अगर एंटी पायरेसी ऑपरेशंस नहीं हुआ तो इंटरनेशनल शिपिंग के ऊपर असर तो जरूर पड़ेगा, इसमें दो राय नहीं है. तो इस हालत में इज देयर अ नीड कि इंडिया को कि ओके यू हैव गॉन, वहां आपने एंटी पायरेसी ऑपरेशन वगैरह शुरू कर दिया है, कि कैन वी नाउ स्टार्ट हेल्पिंग एरिट्रिया, इथियोपिया, सोमालिया, केन्या and all these countries to get out of this piracy chakkar? Is there somewhere we can start doing that? Because abhi ke liye to the Western countries and all those other players are more interested in up north in the Arabian Peninsula and Israel and Gaza and Lebanon, और वहां फंसे पड़े हैं. बट अगर यहाँ प्रॉब्लम नहीं सॉर्ट आउट नहीं हुआ तो प्रॉब्लम तो हमारे ऊपर भी आके गिर सकता है। तो इसके बारे
So
में आपका क्या राय है?
I think Indian Navy has had strong relationship with the southern Indian Ocean, with the Seychelles, with the Mauritius, with Comoros and Madagascar, and now the Agalega facility has been inaugurated formally. With Mozambique, we have, with Tanzania, we have a growing relationship. And now with Kenya, when their president came to India a few months ago, there is actually a
Yeah.
joint statement on maritime security. So there is a progress over there. With Somalia, because of the lack of real authority, I don't think we have taken up much yet. But recently with Ethiopia, there is again a further effort to expand defense cooperation, provide defense supplies. Uh, with Eritrea, they don't borrow, they don't take a line of credit, that is more restrictive. But certainly, Kenya, Tanzania, Ethiopia, there is a revival of defense cooperation, particularly focusing on maritime security. So I think their facilities would be available to us, but none of them have the capacity to deal with these pirates on the sea. This we noticed even when in Cabo Delgado in Mozambique there was an insurgency. Mozambique did not have a coastal capacity to attack them from the sea. Even South African capacity was very limited. It was basically Indians and the French navies who were operating, trying to close the sea route to supply the rebels in the Cabo Delgado, who were ultimately put down by Rwandan forces. So I see India diplomatically increasing its heft, but for the foreseeable future, I think the constant vigil that Indian Navy has had. I don't think the deployments of Indian Navy are new. To my mind, they've always been there, patrolling like they're in the South China Sea. It's just that when something happens, like in South China Sea, very often Indian Navy comes to notice because of a volcano or a tsunami, and they are almost the first to reach. Why are they the first? Because they're already around.
Around,
Same
yes, sir.
goes, the Indian Navy is around and now they are acting. That I think the resolute action without ducking responsibility, I must say, very positive action. This shows
Yeah.
India as a responsible power, and it shows that we take the fact that the coast of Eastern Southern Africa, that Indian Ocean, is part of our Indo Pacific policy, is a serious contention.
Yeah, I think you made very important points, sir. I'll get back to this map और मैं सबको बताना चाहता हूँ जो हमारा एम्बेसडर साहब बोल रहे हैं। आप देखिए जहाँ एंटी पायरेसी ऑपरेशन लिखा है, तो आप पूरा नेवी वहां से लेकर नीचे अगलीगढ़ तक अभी हमारा प्रेजेंस है। उसके बाद मिनिकॉय में भी हमारा एक बेस बन रहा है। पोर्ट ब्लेयर तो स्ट्रेंथन हो ही रहा है। अगर आप देखेंगे तो पूरा इंडियन ओशन के ऊपर हमारा रीच है, राइट। और मेरे ख्याल में इस इलाके में आज के दिन एकमात्र नेवी है इंडियन नेवी और इंडियन फोर्सेस। मैं ये नेवी ही की बात नहीं कर रहा हूँ, एयरफोर्स ने भी काम किया। ये जो एमवी रुइन के ऊपर जो अटैक हुआ था उसको वार्ड ऑफ करने के लिए, और इट वाज अ कॉम्प्लिकेटेड ऑपरेशन। सो एकमात्र नेवी है और एकमात्र आर्म फोर्सेस है जहां हम यहाँ चाहे हुए हैं। तो सर, इफ दिस इज द केस, व्हाट डज इट डू फॉर आवर ओवरऑल grip on this area? I mean,
I think that our power projection is very real, and I mean now it is not only showing the flag; you're actually playing a useful role
role.
in keeping global shipping safe. I mean, we talk of a free and open Indo-Pacific. I think this is real resolute action by India to keep the Indo-Pacific free and open, because as I explained, to us the Indian Ocean is part of the Indo-Pacific. India, Japan and France all include this area in the Indo-Pacific policy. The US and Australia don't. So therefore I think we are playing a very good. Yes.
Yeah, I think we are playing a tremendous role. And I would like to explain to everyone. You see, when the navies operate in this manner, खास करके कोई भी navy, and you have now reached from one end of the Indian Ocean to the other end of the Indian Ocean. Like what our, our maritime interest was defined by our Prime Minister, then Prime Minister Mr. Manmohan Singh, who said India's interests come from Gulf of Aden to the Strait of Malacca. And today you are controlling that entire area.
Yes.
And you're not only controlling the thing, or dream, or rather, or vision, or ambition, what jo bhi boliye aap, of being net security provider in this area is coming true now. Right? मैं ये इसमें आपको बताना चाहता हूं, आप देखिए पीएलए किसी तरीके से भी यहाँ काम नहीं कर रहा है, और ये भी मैं बताना चाहता हूं फर्क क्या है। इनको डिप्लॉय किस लिए किया गया था, जैसे एम्बेसडर साहब ने बताया था, पीएलए को यहाँ इसीलिए डिप्लॉय किया गया था ऊपरी तौर पर कि एंटी पायरेसी ऑपरेशन के लिए। बट अगर आप चाइनीज लेक को पढ़ेंगे तो यहाँ ये पता चलता है कि जी जिनपिंग साहब इनका नेवी को इधर इसीलिए भेजा है ताकि उनको एक्सपीरियंस मिले, वॉर एक्सपीरियंस मिले, डिप्लॉयमेंट एक्सपीरियंस मिले, उनको लॉजिस्टिक्स एक्सपीरियंस मिले। वो तो हो नहीं रहा क्योंकि वो अंदर जिबूती में बैठे हैं। तो ये एक विचित्र सा स्थिति हो गया है, जो हमारा नेवी छोटा है पर फैला हुआ है और अपना काम कर रहा है। और ये जो बड़ा नेवी है, सबसे दुनिया में सबसे बड़ा नेवी है, और वो है जिबूती में बैठा है, और वो साउथ चाइना सी से बाहर निकल के नहीं आ रहा है। तो इसी से आपको हमें पता चलता है कि फर्क क्या है। फर्क और बात यह है कि जो भी आपने सुना है, एम्बेसडर साहब ने किस तरीके से अच्छी तरीके से बताया कि वहां का प्रॉब्लम क्या है, और वो उसमें हल निकलने वाला नहीं है। तो ये जो एंटी पायरेसी ऑपरेशन चलता रहेगा, इनफैक्ट वो बढ़ते जा रहे हैं। तो आवर स्टैंडिंग इन द इंटरनेशनल कम्युनिटी इज गोइंग अप। ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट पॉइंट है। दूसरी बात यह है कि द सेकेंड पॉइंट विच ही हिमसेल्फ हैज सेड, जो मैं हाईलाइट करना चाहता हूं, कि इंडिया, फ्रांस और जापान, ये तीनों देश इस इलाके को पार्ट ऑफ इंडो पैसिफिक मानते हैं। और ये काम करते करते इंडिया और फ्रांस का कोऑपरेशन बढ़ रहा है। वैसे भी हमारा स्ट्रेटेजिक पार्टनर है फ्रांस, राइट? जापान भी एक स्ट्रेटेजिक पार्टनर है। तो एक नया पार्टनरशिप बन के आ रहा है, जहां इंडिया का जो स्तर है अंतरराष्ट्रीय, इसमें बढ़ रहा है। और इससे बाकी नेवीज को भी पता चल रहा है कि इंडियन आर्म फोर्सेस जो है, उनसे मुकाबला करना उतना आसान नहीं है। So I'll put it back into a context, because what you have said here, it might be something we are talking of, piracy, but I'm talking of the maritime security part of it. 2004 सुनामी जब हुआ था, तो बाकी सब नेवी बैठ गए, सिर्फ इस इलाके में दो ही नेवी काम कर रहे थे, वो है इंडियन नेवी और दूसरा यूएस नेवी। बाकी सब बैठ गए, और ये जो पीएलए का नेवी तो बिल्कुल अपने बाहर निकला नहीं। अभी भी वही हालत नजर आ रहा है। आप देखिए यूके नेवी और यूएस नेवी जो है रेड सी में, वो एंटी हौती ऑपरेशंस कर रहे हैं, और बिल्कुल पूरा पायरेसी का ऑपरेशन हमारे ऊपर ये दामोदर बैठा है, पर हम अच्छे तरीके से कर रहे हैं। तो हमें समझने की जरूरत है कि भारत का स्तर दिन बर दिन बढ़ता जा रहा है, और हमारा अगर इकोनॉमी में उसी तरीके से बढ़ेगा तो सब कुछ ठीक होता जाएगा। सर, would you like to add anything to what I've said? Because जितने भी एंटी पायरेसी ऑपरेशन के बारे में आपने बताया है, वो it has a spillover effect on other aspects of maritime security and the Indian Ocean region, and consequently the global standing of India. So would you like to add something? I'll be grateful.
Yes, two things. First, when you have very correctly explained about maritime security. So maritime security today has to largely deal with what are called non-traditional threats. Not open war, but non-traditional. Non-traditional threats are humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. That Indian Navy has been providing to this coast right through the period, because there are many cyclones. During the COVID, we were providing food aid all through this region. The second part is counter-terrorism. Now that also we are working with them. As I said, Cabo Delgado, we did work from the sea to prevent terrorism and insurgency in Cabo Delgado, where we have got very strong commercial interests. Third aspect is money laundering, drug running, and human trafficking. Now, this is what is called the Southern Corridor, which comes into Mombasa and Kenya. So, Indian Navy is always working with others to curtail this aspect. And the United Nations uh, agency which deals with drugs is always grateful to the Indian Navy because we have to disrupt the trafficking from Myanmar and Afghanistan, which comes through these seas that you have shown on the map. And the fourth one of the aspect of this is illegal fishing, IUU. They are also now by if you interdict piracy and other, but we are not taking action against trawlers fishing in the EEZ of coastal countries. That we don't have the authority. So that part remains a problem. But this anti-piracy operation is also a part of the non-traditional threats. Now, second part I want to mention to you that yes, we have got strategic partnership with Japan, France, US, and therefore we can use their bases for logistics and other reasons in this region. But what I notice in these current anti-piracy operations is that we are basing our supply chain and logistics entirely out of Indian bases. Even the commandos who landed on the MV Ruin were actually flown several thousand kilometers from
Yeah, yeah.
Indian bases. We
India,
did not
India's.
land in Agalega or Seychelles or Djibouti and then transfer them. No. So I think this has been a very good force projection from our side. Very good force projection to show that we are capable of implementing our goals strategically based out of India. And once you have Minicoy and Agalega, which are yours and not somebody else's, you will have much more space in this region. So India will be the leading net security provider in the Western and Southern Indian Ocean. That I think is a clear message going on.
Yes, sir. I have no doubt about it. I just want to add one more thing. Besides all non-traditional threats, we've also dealt with one traditional threat in Maldives way back
Yes,
when they
yes.
wanted to have a coup and take over the island and all that. And so we have our presence and strength and all that. एंड आई वुड ऑल्सो लाइक टू, ये भी मैं बताना चाहता हूँ, सब लोग समझते हैं कि नेवल पावर का मतलब ये है कि हमारे पास जितना पनडुब्बियां हो और एसएसबीएन्स हो या वी हैव फ्रिगेट्स, वी कैन फायर एंड फाइट एंड ऑल दैट, ऐसा नहीं होता. ठीक है, ये पावर प्रोजेक्शन का गेम ही अलग है. ओके, और जितना वो हार्ड पावर ऑफ नेवी है वो पावर प्रोजेक्शन को असिस्ट करता है. So that is one thing which is very important. Second thing, ये पूरा ये इसमें क्या है, हमारे जो नेवी को एक्सपीरियंस मिल रहा है, जॉइंट ऑपरेशंस में हमें एक्सपीरियंस मिल रहा है. जो जैसे हमारा एम्बेसडर साहब ने बताया है कि ये जो ऑपरेशन एमवी रूएन के साथ हुआ है, वो हुआ था जहां हमने एक C-17 को इंडिया से भेजा और एयर ड्रॉप करके कमांडोस को वो पायरेट्स को ओवर पावर करके उनको पकड़ लिया. जैसे हमारे मार्कोस गए, वो हाथ खड़ा कर दिया उन्होंने. बताना तो आसान है ये सब, बट करना मुश्किल है. और कितना मुश्किल है इसके बारे में मेरे को कल यस्टरडे चीफ ऑफ डिफेंस स्टाफ ने बताया कि इट वाज वन ऑफ द मोस्ट कॉम्प्लिकेटेड ऑपरेशंस, क्योंकि हमने आज तक ऐसे कॉम्प्लिकेटेड ऑपरेशन किया नहीं. और इससे क्या है कि हमारा जॉइंट फोर्स प्रोजेक्शन कैपेबिलिटी बढ़ रहा है. एंड दिस इज अ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट थिंग. हो सकता है एक छोटा से नाव को बचाया, पर आप सोचिए, एक आप 2000 किलोमीटर दूर, तट से दूर, आप जाके अपना एयर पावर के जरिए और आपका कमांडो पावर के जरिए आप हावी हो रहे हो किसी के ऊपर और उस इलाके को सैनिटाइज कर रहे हो. So these are very complicated operations which we are getting experience. और अगर हम सोचते हैं कि ये आप just to give you a comparison, what is PLA doing? It is not doing anything. उसके पास माइट है, बहुत ताकत है, पर उस ताकत को इस्तेमाल नहीं कर रहा है. और इस्तेमाल करने के मूड में नहीं है। अगर इस्तेमाल करने के मूड में नहीं है तो ये आप लेके रहिए कि दे कैन नॉट कम और इस इलाके में हावी हो सकते हैं। राइट, दिस इज व्हाट इंडिया इज स्लोली प्रोग्रेसिंग टू। So I finished what we wanted to put across. I think you've given a tremendous, you know, explanation of the factors behind piracy, the politics behind piracy, और इसका इस इलाके के जियोपॉलिटिक्स, खास करके हॉर्न ऑफ अफ्रीका के बारे में आपने अच्छी तरीके से बताया। मैं सब जितने भी ये प्रोग्राम देख रहे हैं, मैं आपको यकीनन बता सकता हूं, इससे बढ़िया एक्सप्लेनेशन आपको और कहीं नहीं मिलेगा। अगर आप जानना चाहते हो एंटी पायरेसी ऑपरेशंस के बारे में, आपके दोस्तों को ये दीजिए और इसके बारे में दोबारा जो एम्बेसडर साहब ने पहले बताया पूरा, सोमालिया के बारे में, एरिट्रिया के बारे में, केन्या के बारे में, इथियोपिया के बारे में, जिबूती के बारे में दोबारा देखिए। जब तक इसके पॉलिटिक्स को आप समझेंगे नहीं, ये एंटी पायरेसी ऑपरेशंस को भी हम समझेंगे नहीं। So I finished. If you have anything to say, fine. Otherwise, I'll ask questions. I'll take
Thank you
questions
so
from
much.
there.
Thank you. Yes.
Uh, okay. The first question. Yeah. Was there a need to send a message being making visuals of Operation Sankalp public? If yes, then to whom? Why are we publicizing the operations we've carried out? That's a fundamental idea. I think, could you answer it, sir?
I think that is the what we were just talking about, the force projection of India and its ability to handle a situation far from its shores, but on its own. That capability has been shown. And if you don't publicize it, how do people come to know? So, as I'm saying, if you see Twitter traffic from commentators on Somalia, after many years, I've seen them suddenly start talking about India. So, there is an understanding that India is playing a role and its power projection is efficient and effective.
Yeah. So the second question is, sir, what is a measure of national naval might? Is Navy versus piracy a good measure of naval might of a prominent nation like Bharat, or SSBN's aircraft carriers, etc., ability versus a nation state? So your take, and then
I think, General Shankar, you just mentioned this in the closing part
yeah,
of.
yeah.
So yes, SSBNs, aircraft carriers, all these are important force projectors and force multipliers. But if you see currently, where has the Navy been called in? Either it's being called in for humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, or it is being called in to rescue Indians out of Djibouti, out of Lebanon, out of many places on board ships, and now it is anti-piracy. So these are the non-traditional threats. So while you build your big power and spend most of your budget on big things, which are basically for force multipliers and for conventional wars, these elements to come to aid of humanity, whether your own or global, is perhaps the more visible and common use of your naval and air assets. The large airlift capacity, for instance, that you have is actually being used to bring people back, the reverse. So I think these are important capacities which are then put to use.
Yeah, I'll just amplify this. इन्होंने बोला एयरलिफ्ट कैपेसिटी हम इस्तेमाल कर रहे हैं लोगों को मुश्किल हालत से बाहर निकालना। आप जरा सोचिए, अगर आप लोगों को एक मुश्किल हालत से बाहर निकालने का क्षमता रख सकते हो, तो लोगों को एक मुश्किल हालत में ले जाके यू कैन पुट देम बैक इन दैट मुश्किल हालत। सो इट्स अ प्रैक्टिस। ये सब सोच सोच की बात है ये, ठीक है? ओके। एक और चीज है, लड़ाई हर रोज नहीं लड़ी जाती है। लड़ाई होता है 20, 30, 40, 50 साल में एक बार। बट उस लड़ाई के लिए तैयारी करने के लिए छोटे छोटे चीज करने की जरूरत है। राइट? जैसे डिजास्टर मैनेजमेंट हुआ, काउंटर टेररिज्म ऑपरेशंस हुआ, एंटी पायरेसी ऑपरेशंस हुआ, उससे क्या है, ये मानसिक शक्ति बढ़ती है। मैं तो हर वक्त ये बोलता हूँ कि हम इंडियन आर्मी का ताकत कहाँ आता है? इंडियन आर्मी का ताकत बड़े बड़े तोपों में नहीं आता। इंडियन आर्मी का ताकत आता है हमारे जवानों से। और वो जवान किस लिए फिट है, और उनके ऊपर वाई वी कैन डिपेंड ऑन देम, क्योंकि उन्होंने ये छोटी छोटी काउंटर इंसर्जेंसी हुआ, सियाचिन में हुआ, और ये डिजास्टर रिलीफ में हुआ, ये सब काम करते हैं। इसमें क्या है, मानसिक दृढ़ता आती है, और इससे क्या है, डर खत्म हो जाता है। और बाकी जो देखते हैं आपको, उनको पता चल, डर आता है बाकियों को। और एक्चुअली मैं बता रहा हूँ, सो आई विद इन अ मिनट आई विल एक्सप्लेन टू यू दिस विद अ एग्जांपल। मैं कमांड कर रहा था ब्रिगेड एक काउंटर इंसर्जेंसी इलाके में। हमने एक टेररिस्ट को पकड़ा, उसको बोला, यार तुम तो पुलिस के ऊपर अटैक करते हो, सीआरपीएफ के ऊपर अटैक करते हो, वगैरह वगैरह, आर्मी के ऊपर अटैक क्यों नहीं करते हो? कहता, सर मैं नहीं करूंगा अटैक, हमें डर है। मैंने कहा, किस लिए डरते हो? कहता, सर आप ट्रेन करते हो, आपका सभी कहानी होता है, आप हर रोज फायर करते हो, राइट? आप, हमें पता है आपका हर एक आदमी फायर करता है, और वो फायर करने से यू नो एक्शंस आपके बहुत चुस्त है। अगर हम आपको अटैक करेंगे तो हम मर जाएंगे। तो वो डर जो है ना, पैदा होता है बाकियों को देखते हुए। दैट इज द स्ट्रेंथ विच डेवलप्स। उसके बाद टू हैंडल एसएसबीएन्स और कैरियर, ये सब बड़ा स्ट्रेटजी है, वो अपने आप you come to know, okay, and that you go into something called deterrence and things like that, but all that is an outflow. The daily bread and butter jobs to keep the ocean safe, right? The rest are all later day stories. Okay. Okay, Pritik, ये भी आपने, sir, to some extent you answered this, but we will take it on. Will the world finally acknowledge the world's class skills and professionalism of Indian Navy? Yes or no? One thing I know is no one will call out the plan for acting like wooses.
So he asked for yes or no. My answer is yes.
Yes, it's a very simple thing. There's no two ways about it. Now everyone understands, okay, very clearly. Indian Navy should not be trifled with.
Yes.
Okay. Can't India have an arrangement like China has in the Red Sea, where the Houthis don't touch Chinese ships, even as the Somalis and Houthis seem to be helping them?
You know, this is a very difficult. You could ask a broader question: could India have interdicted the Saudi-Iran contradiction? Could we have solved that like the Chinese did? So, I mean, all is not a question of Houthis. Houthis are only a front end of a larger engagement. So, either we play a peacemaker's role or a diplomatic adventure we are ready to take. So, it's only in that, but I don't think people undertake diplomatic adventures till they are certain of a positive result.
Yeah, that's a very important thing. Look, all action, military action is an extension of the politics. It's an extension of the diplomacy. In fact, diplomacy is also an extension of the politics. Everything starts from politics and geopolitics. So the geopolitics will play out. That's more important. Okay, this is also an interesting question, sir. If Iran backed Houthis attack India, Israel and India US cargo ships, will Indian Navy attack Houthis and thumping chest like victory on opportunist Somalia pirates, or go to table talk with Iran?
So I think I have not seen any direct Houthi attack on Indian ships, but the Houthis are choosing targets which not only on the basis of ownership of ships, but also where they are heading and where they are coming from. And if in any of these categories the Israel is involved, then they seem to think it's a legitimate target for them. Now, if India has such big trade with Israel, which requires shipping, those ships could be targets. And in such circumstances, would we attack the Houthis? I think in practice, there would be coordination with the EU, UK, and US navies to deal with Houthis who are threatening Indian interests.
Yeah, and it's not only that, you must understand that we also have good equations with Iran. So even that
Yes.
diplomatic channel will be thing. So and you should not think that Houthis are doing something, like loose cannons. They also have a goal, right? Their goal is very clear. Till they continue to act against Israel and do what they have and show power, they also continue to remain in power in Yemen. This has got an internal political dynamic between the official government of Yemen and the Houthis at play, right? They have an answerability to their own people. They're standing up to their own people and saying, look, we are doing all this, so we are great. So there are layers to this whole story. You can't put everything in black and white and say we chest thumping and all that. And at this point of time, सबको समझना चाहिए, there is no other forge or system which can, stop the piracy or suppress the piracy. If the piracy is left unchecked, and if the Houthis continue to do what they do, then the costs for everyone is going to go up. And this is an opportunity which I think it's a low-cost opportunity which we are making use of. Because like what the ambassador said, already we have presence there. You have to understand our agriculture, I'm talking of agriculture because the import of fertilizers from that area is huge. Our agriculture comes, the basic fertilizers come from the Gulf. Your energy dependency on that is huge. So already your deployment is there to ensure your energy and fertilizers and a lot of things from that area. And also you have to have this presence to ensure that the diaspora in that area of yours, they are within arm's reach if you have to help them out tomorrow. You can't say, "Bhai, मैं यहाँ से Bombay से शुरू करूँगा अपना गाड़ी चलाना." You have to have something there. So it is not that we are doing something chest thumping thing kind of a thing. You already have there. So you have made use of your presence for other things to do these piracy operations and show how effective a power you are, which no one else has been able to do. So you get leverage. You get leverage in many other things. Correct me if I'm wrong, sir.
No, I agree with you.
So all in all, so there's a lot of things which are going in for this piracy thing. एंड ये जो पायरेसी है मेरे हिसाब से और मेरे ख्याल में एम्बेसडर साहब के हिसाब से इतना जल्दी जाएगा नहीं, ये चलेगा 2-3 साल और ये तब तक चलेगा जब तक वो इजराइल और गाजा का कहानी खत्म नहीं होगा. जब तक वो नहीं खत्म होगा ये भी चलता रहेगा. इससे क्या है कि दिन पर दिन वी हैव टू बी मोर इन्वॉल्व इन दिस होल स्टोरी. This is what we have to understand. Maybe after 3-4 months we'll come back and see what the state is and we'll do a program. But sir, I must thank you for the amount of detail you put in. I thought it was fantastic. Those who don't see this program have lost because you don't understand what all this unless you go through this program. So I honestly thank you for this. And I also thank all the viewers for having come and seen this program. Please send this program to everyone. There's a lot of value in what we have spoken today. Thanks a lot, sir. Good evening and Jai Hind to you, sir.
Jai Hind, you're most gracious, sir. Thank you. It's a pleasure being on your show.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Good night.